Hey, deep divers. Ready for another myth-busting deep dive? You guys sent over this awesome interview with a Harvard prof who studies evolutionary medicine, and whoa, it blew my mind.
Yeah.
We're going to dig into his research on
Eh,
exercise and aging.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. He goes and lives with indigenous populations, to see how
Hmm.
they move and stuff, to get a real sense of how humans were meant to move.
So it's like comparing us to Ferraris stuck in rush hour,
Yeah.
kinda. Our bodies were built for more than sitting at a desk.
Right. Exactly. And you can see the effects of that mismatch in rising rates of chronic diseases and even mental health issues, which I hadn't really thought about before.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, like, if our bodies and minds aren't getting what they need. Okay, let's talk about the exercise paradox. I thought humans evolved to be, like, constantly on the move.
You and me both. But this professor, he actually says no. He points out that hunter-gatherers who, we think of as the model for our ancestral lifestyle, they actually sit a lot too.
That's it.
Yeah, they get their rest in, just like us. But the difference is they do what he calls interrupted sitting. So they get up a lot, little bursts of activity throughout the day. Not like us, glued to our chairs.
So it's not just about how much we sit, it's about moving more throughout the day.
Bingo! Think about your daily routine. Could you squeeze in a few more movement breaks? Even just standing up to take a call or walking over to a coworker instead of emailing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, get ready for this next myth buster. It's about sleep. This professor is not buying the 8-hour sleep thing at all.
It's so interesting, right? He talks about all this research on pre-industrial societies, and people in those communities, they only average 6 to 7 hours a night and no naps.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
I love my sleep, but maybe 8 hours isn't, like, the holy grail.
And actually, there's research suggesting that 7 hours might be the sweet spot for most adults.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's keep busting these myths. What about the 10,000 steps a day thing?
Oh, that's a marketing campaign, plain and simple. It started back in the 60s, this Japanese company that made pedometers. A genius idea, but no real science behind it.
No way. So all this time. But what does the research actually say about steps?
Well, it seems like 7 to 8,000 steps, you get pretty much the same benefits as 10,000.
Okay, phew. Glad I don't have to stress about hitting that higher number all the time. Okay, this next topic, this one's for all of us, as we get older. And it really throws out the idea of slowing down as you age.
Yeah, I know, right? He's totally against the idea that it's normal to become less active as we age. Says it's a harmful myth, and I gotta say, I'm starting to agree.
I've kind of always thought, slowing down is just part of getting older, but why does he think it's a myth?
Because he says exercise, it actually helps fight aging. It's like hitting the repair button on your body. Slows down muscle loss, protects your DNA, keeps your brain sharp.
Wow. I love that, the repair button. But is there, is there science to back this up?
Oh, yeah, totally. He talks about this Harvard study. They followed these alumni for decades, and the ones who exercised regularly, they had a 50% lower death rate in their 60s and 70s compared to those who weren't as active.
That's huge. It
But
really makes you think. So exercise is like a fountain of youth in a way.
it kind of is. And this professor, as he's getting older, he's gotten really into strength training. He says it's become a passion.
That's cool. I've been meaning to get back into strength training. But what makes it so important as we age?
Well, he talks about something called sarcopenia. It's basically age-related muscle loss, and it can lead to all sorts of things: frailty, falls, less mobility, and it can even make you more vulnerable to other diseases.
So strength training, it's not just about looking good. It's about staying strong and independent as we get older.
100%. And here's another huge point he makes. Chronic diseases, they don't have to be an inevitable part of aging.
Wait, really? Like, we don't just have to accept that we'll get cancer or heart disease at some point.
That's what he says. He's so many of these diseases, they're preventable. And lifestyle choices, they play a huge role. He even throws out the stat. 75% of diseases in the U.S., they could be prevented. But we hardly spend anything on prevention in healthcare.
Wow, that's crazy. It's like we're waiting for people to get sick instead of helping them stay healthy.
Yeah, it's pretty backwards. And it's not just about exercise either. He talks about diet too, especially sugar. He's got this analogy. He compares it to our Paleolithic ancestors, eating Mars bars all day long.
Uh-huh. I could just picture that. But what's so bad about sugar?
Well, he says it's super inflammatory, and that inflammation, it drives a lot of these modern diseases.
So sugar's like the enemy, and exercise is, what, like the superhero?
He actually says it helps regulate inflammation, like it turns down the immune system, which is kind of wild when you think about it.
So it's not just about burning calories or building muscle. It's about keeping our bodies in balance.
Exactly. But here's the thing. We've kind of created this comfort crisis, as he puts it. We've made this world where convenience comes first, and that's not always the best for our health.
I love that comfort crisis. So true.
Think about your day. How many times do you choose the easy way out, even if you know it's not the healthiest, like taking the elevator or driving when you could walk?
Okay. I'm seeing a pattern here in my own life. But how do we, break out of this comfort crisis?
Oh, he's got some ideas. He tells a story about visiting the Bjorn Borg sports company.
Bjorn Borg, the tennis player.
Yep, that one. So the company CEO, he's made exercise mandatory for all employees.
No way, for real.
Yeah. They've got this dedicated sports hour every Friday. Some people hated it. A few even quit. But it seems like it's built this, healthy culture at the company.
That's kind of cool. But also, is it ethical, to make people exercise?
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Tough call. I need to think about that one. But beyond, making it mandatory, what are some ways we can actually motivate ourselves to move more?
Well, he's big on social connections, and accountability. Like running with a friend, it's way more fun than going solo, right? Or joining a team, that sense of camaraderie. And even those fitness challenges, like in your WhatsApp group, they can work.
Ooh, light bulb moment. We should totally start a deep dive fitness challenge for our listeners.
That's a great idea.
There's definitely something to be said for, knowing you're not alone in it. Makes it easier to stay motivated.
Right. And speaking of finding ways to enjoy exercise, this professor, he actually says something about running that I know you've been thinking about with your foot pain.
You mean my plantar fasciitis?
Yeah. So he's basically saying running, it's not actually bad for your knees.
Wait, seriously? Everyone always says it is? My doctor even told me to, cut back on running.
Yeah, it's like the classic advice. But he says a lot of running injuries, especially knee problems, they come from bad running form. And guess what causes bad form? You got it, our modern shoes.
So my comfy shoes are actually, messing up my running. Wow.
That's what he says. He's really into barefoot running, or at least, running in minimalist shoes. He says it strengthens your foot muscles, so there's less impact on your knees.
Maybe those minimal shoes I've been trying aren't such a bad idea then.
Could be. Just got to take it slow, ease into it, don't want to cause any more injuries.
Right, for sure. So it sounds like he's saying we need to kind of relearn how to run.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got one more big piece of advice about exercise. Find something you love. It's got to be enjoyable. There's no point forcing yourself to do something you hate.
So true. Everyone's different. What works for one person might be torture for someone else.
Right, like there's no one right way to exercise. It's about finding what you love and what fits into your life. He basically asks, what does that look like for you? Like, what kind of movement brings you joy?
Yeah, that's a great question to think about. It's about making exercise a celebration of what your body can do, not a punishment.
Absolutely.
I feel like we've covered so much already, and there's still more to talk about.
I know, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg.
This is so good. We're just scratching the surface of this professor's work.
There's a lot more myth-busting to do, and tons more practical tips for reclaiming our evolutionary heritage and moving more joyfully.
Welcome back to our deep dive, into this whole evolutionary medicine thing.
I'm still, processing everything we talked about last time. This professor's ideas are, totally changing the way I think about exercise.
I know, right? It's like a whole new perspective on how we're supposed to be living and moving in this modern world.
Exactly. Our bodies were designed for a totally different environment, And this next part of the interview gets even deeper into that. What happens when our lifestyle clashes with our evolution?
He uses this phrase, disevolution, which I thought was really interesting. Disevolution. I've never heard that before. What does that even mean?
So basically, he's saying that by creating this world of comfort and convenience, we're actually, moving away from the adaptations that helped our ancestors survive and thrive.
Oh, I see. So it's not that we're evolving in a bad way. It's more like we're losing those beneficial adaptations because we're not challenged in the same ways anymore.
Well, right. It's like all those amazing abilities we developed over millions of years, our bodies are starting to forget them because we're not using them.
Wow, that's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah.
And he actually gives a really interesting example of this disevolution in action. plantar fasciitis.
Oh, yeah, that part was fascinating. He was talking about how a lot of podiatrists just prescribe orthotics as like a quick fix, but he's not a fan of that approach.
Because it's just masking the symptom instead of actually addressing the root problem, right?
Exactly. He says plantar fasciitis is often caused by weak foot muscles, which are weakened by, you guessed it, our
Huh.
super supportive shoes.
So those comfy shoes that are supposed to be good for our feet are actually making them weaker and more prone to problems down the line.
That's his argument. He compares it to, like, never challenging your muscles with weights. You wouldn't expect to get stronger that way, right? Our
Yeah,
feet need to be used and challenged to stay strong and functional.
that makes total sense. But so, what are we supposed to do? Walk around barefoot all the time?
He's not saying we should go full caveman, but he does think we should be incorporating more barefoot time into our lives. Or at least wearing shoes that are more minimalist, Shoes that let our feet move and flex naturally.
Okay, so it's about finding that balance, right? Giving our feet support, but also letting them do what they were designed to do.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole use it or lose it thing applies to our entire body, not just our feet.
Right. I mean, think about it. Our ancestors, they didn't have the option of just sitting around all day. They had to be active to survive. Hunting, gathering, farming.
It was like built into their lives. They were constantly moving, so they developed strong muscles, a resilient heart and lungs, a strong immune system, all because they were challenging their bodies all the time.
Yeah, it's crazy how different our lives are now. We drive everywhere, take elevators, sit at desks all day. It's like we're slowly disconnecting from our physical selves.
And that disconnect, he says, it's a big reason why we're seeing so many of these chronic diseases. It's like our bodies are rebelling against this unnatural state of inactivity.
Okay, so how do we fix this? How do we bring back that level of physical activity when our whole environment is pushing us towards comfort and convenience?
Well, he talks about being intentional. Like, we have to
Mhm.
make a conscious effort to move our bodies, to build it into our routines.
It's those little things, right? Taking the stairs, walking to work, standing up every hour, just making those small changes consistently over time.
Exactly. And he also talks about finding activities you genuinely enjoy. That's what makes it sustainable. If you dread going to the gym, you're probably not going to stick with it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, some people love running. For others, it's like torture. Some people thrive in group classes. Others prefer to work out alone.
Exactly. It's about finding what speaks to you, what makes you want to move your body. He even suggests experimenting, trying different things until you find something that really clicks.
Like dancing, hiking, swimming, rock climbing. There's so many options.
Exactly. And don't forget about the power of social motivation. Having a workout buddy, joining a team, that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's like having that built-in accountability. He told that story about his friend who made a commitment contract. She had to donate money to a cause she hated if she didn't reach her walking goals.
It sounds crazy, but it worked for her. I guess we all have different things that motivate us.
That's a good point. It's not one size fits all. It's about figuring out what works for you and using it to your advantage.
Yeah, and along those lines, he really emphasized the importance of compassion, like
Yeah.
not judging ourselves or others for our fitness level or our struggles with motivation.
Yeah, I remember he said he sometimes struggles to resist taking the elevator. It's nice to know that even someone who studies this stuff for a living has those moments.
Makes him seem more human, right? We're all in this together. We all have our weaknesses. It's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
It's about celebrating the journey and supporting each other along the way.
Exactly. And speaking of journeys, he had some really interesting thoughts about retirement.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part. He wasn't exactly a fan of the traditional retirement model, was he?
He was saying that retirement is kind of a modern invention, it doesn't really align with our evolutionary programming.
Right, like our ancestors didn't just stop being active and engaged once they hit a certain age.
Exactly. They kept contributing, kept moving, kept being part of the community until they physically couldn't anymore.
And he even mentioned some research showing that people who stay active and engaged in later life have a lower risk of dying.
It makes you wonder if our current idea of retirement is actually making people age faster.
Because they're losing that sense of purpose, those social connections, the opportunity to challenge themselves physically and mentally.
Yeah, totally. It's like we're telling people to slow down and fade into the background, but maybe that's not what's best for them.
He's challenging us to think differently about aging, right? It's not about retreating from life. It's about staying involved, staying active, staying engaged.
And then he went on to talk about why we find certain physical traits attractive, which I thought was a really interesting tangent.
Oh, yeah, he brought up the Liver King. That guy on social media with the crazy muscles.
Yeah, and his point was, while that kind of physique might be impressive to us now, it wouldn't have been very advantageous for our ancestors.
Because it takes so much energy to maintain all that muscle mass, right?
Exactly. Back then, resources were scarce. It made more sense to be lean and efficient.
So the Liver King, as impressive as he is, might have actually been at a disadvantage compared to a leaner, more efficient hunter-gatherer.
He also pointed out that our ancestors wouldn't have had access to the kind of diet and training regimen you need to build that kind of physique.
It's interesting, right, how our modern environment and our cultural ideas have really skewed our perception of what's considered attractive or ideal.
We're bombarded with images of these, like, perfectly sculpted bodies, but it's not always realistic or even healthy.
It's a good reminder to focus on what our bodies can do, not just how they look.
And before we move on, I want to circle back to something he said earlier about compassion.
Oh yeah, he was really big on that, wasn't he? Being compassionate towards ourselves and others.
He kept saying we shouldn't judge people for their fitness level or their struggles with motivation.
It's easy to forget that everyone's starting from a different place, and that it takes time and effort to build new habits.
And it's okay to slip up sometimes. He even admitted that it took him years to find a workout routine that he actually enjoyed and stuck with.
That's reassuring, right?
Yeah.
We're all human. We all have our challenges.
It's about progress, not perfection. And celebrating those small victories along the way. All right, welcome back to our deep dive. We're in the final stretch now.
I'm so ready for more. This professor's seriously blowing my mind with all this evolutionary stuff.
Right, like it's one thing to know intellectually that our lifestyle's different from our ancestors, but he really makes you feel it, you know?
Totally. And this last part of the interview is all about, like, the practical stuff. How to actually bridge the gap between our modern lives and how we were meant to live.
Yeah, he gives some great advice on how to make it work. And he starts by talking about motivation, which, let's be honest, that's like the key to everything, right?
For sure. If you're not motivated, you're not going to get off the couch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he actually goes into, like, the neuroscience of it. He talks about how exercise triggers this release of dopamine in the brain.
Dopamine, that's the, like, feel-good chemical.
Yeah, exactly. It gives us that sense of pleasure and reward. And that's one of the reasons why exercise can be so addictive, for some people.
But I feel like sometimes I work out and I don't get that feeling.
Well, that's the thing. He says if you're not used to exercising regularly, you might not feel that dopamine rush right away. He compares it to, like, how our bodies can become resistant to insulin if we eat too much sugar.
Oh, interesting. So it's like our brains have become desensitized to those feel-good chemicals because we've been living in this state of, like, inactivity for so long.
Exactly. It's like we got to retrain our brains to associate exercise with pleasure.
Yeah.
And that takes time, consistency.
So it's not just about willpower. It's about actually rewiring those neural pathways.
Yeah, and he says that's why it's so important to find activities you actually enjoy. If you dread every workout, you're never going to stick with it.
So true. Like, I used to force myself to run on the treadmill, and I hated it. It felt like a chore.
Right, but then you discovered rock climbing, and now you love it, right?
Exactly.
And
Doesn't even feel like exercise,
Oh.
It's just fun.
Yeah, and that's the key. He even suggests, like, experimenting with different types of movement until you find something that clicks for you.
It's like finding your exercise soulmate.
Uh-huh, exactly. But it's got to be something you love, Something that makes you feel good.
And it doesn't have to be, like, super intense or anything. It could be dancing or hiking or just going for a walk in nature.
Exactly. And speaking of nature, he also talks about how our modern environment makes it so easy to be inactive.
Yeah, like we have escalators instead of stairs, drive thrusts instead of walk-ins. Everything's designed for convenience, not movement.
Right. And he challenges us to think about how we can redesign our spaces, at home, at work, in our communities, to make it easier to move.
Like maybe take the stairs instead of the elevator, park farther away from the store, set a timer to stand up every hour.
Totally. And he even talks about advocating for more parks, bike lanes, walking trails.
It's about creating a culture where movement is the norm, not the exception.
Yeah. And then he brings up technology, which is kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we have all these gadgets that keep us glued to our screens.
But on the other hand, we have fitness trackers and workout apps that can actually help us stay motivated.
Right. So it's about using technology to our advantage, not letting it control us.
And then he ends with this really powerful call to action. He's like, it's not enough to just know this stuff. We got to share it.
Yeah, he really wants us to be the change, to spread the word about the importance of movement.
It's like we have this responsibility to share what we've learned to help create a healthier future for ourselves and future generations.
Absolutely. He believes we can create this ripple effect, and that's what this podcast is all about. Sharing these ideas, getting people talking, inspiring them to make changes.
This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like my whole perspective on exercise has shifted.
Me too. It's not about punishment, it's about celebration. It's about rediscovering the joy of movement, connecting with our bodies, and honoring our evolutionary heritage.
And it's not just about physical health either, right? It's about mental clarity, emotional well-being, even spiritual connection.
It's about feeling truly alive in our bodies.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that wraps up our epic deep dive into evolutionary medicine.
It's been a blast exploring these ideas with you.
Thanks to all our amazing listeners for tuning in. You guys are the best.
We're so grateful for your support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this episode with your friends.
And if you're feeling extra generous, you can always buy us a coffee or two to help us keep these deep dives going. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep moving.
And remember, the best exercise is the one you'll actually do. So get out there and find what makes you feel alive.
So here's the thing. We're a small, independent podcast, and we rely on the support of our amazing listeners to keep creating content that's thought-provoking, entertaining, and sometimes even a little bit crazy. If you want to help us keep the conversation going, then click the link in the description to buy us a coffee. It's a small price to pay for the laughs, the tears, and the aha moments we bring to your ears. So what do you say? Will you support us and help us keep the conversation going? Click the link now and let's keep it going.